Welcome to Friday night's video in our Master Series. This is the 18th video in our Master Series and the 5th video in our editing phase. Tonight we're going to deal with filtering. So basically we're going to deal with a couple different things. First of all, we're going to deal with filtering. But what we're going to, part of this phase is normally checking phase. I'm going to make a video after this about phase. It's a pretty simple issue. So at this point you will go through this, do your filtering, and then phase, and that will be the next video. But we are going to do basically filtering. Now, other than filtering, we talked about like RX6. Now, if you've done a good job in the recording phase, you'll probably not be dealing with this much. But one thing that I do really like about this is Spectral D Noise and Voice Denoise. These two plugins can really help you kind of clean up the audio after recording a vocal track or an instrument track and getting noise out of it, just plain noise to try to clean it up. And it takes some fussing with different instruments and different situations that you really got to fuss with this piece of software until you get it set. And it takes a little bit of an investigation if you understand how to use this piece of software a little bit to actually clean things up that well. But I do recommend it. This will also deal with things like declip, and if you've got things like you've got dehum, if you've got some hum in the lower end, deverb, like if you've got too much spatialization, too much reverb, impulse response coming back, and the impulse and frequency response, the room ambience is causing too much problem with your piece of audio. This can help clean it up a lot. This is one of the recommended purchases. I'm not going to really get into detail about this piece of software. We will a little bit look at it with clicks, pops, and bleeps and things like that, but I'm not going to get into it too much. But it's a piece of software I recommend because it can really help you do some advanced work, really cleaning things up and dealing with issues that you might be having. If the issues are really bad, normally that I have just redo it if it's possible. But if not, that piece of software can help out a lot. So basically, on an average file you've recorded or something like that, you really want to deal with high pass filtering, low pass filtering, and notch filtering to get it cleaned up. Now, gates are great, but I use gates sometimes like on bass drums, snare drums, things like that. It's closed, it opens, and then it closes again, and it's great for some things like that. Things that are more flowing along, gates are kind of hard to work with on that kind of stuff, but in some instances you can use them, but I don't really recommend them for editing unless you're dealing with sounds that are like start, stop, bam, bam, and there's not much going on in between that you have to worry about it rising and falling all over the place, because it might not work real good in that type of situation, from my experience anyway. So anyway, but there's a video on this channel, I do believe, about gates, and you can investigate using it on some things. Sometimes I will, but most of the time that I'll rely on my high-low pass filtering, my notch filtering to deal with any of that, and at times I'll use gates on like drums. Bass drums, a prime example, something I use a gate on. It bam, 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 and it's gonna open, close, open, close, open, close. And anything more fussy than that I got to be really worried about in my attack and delay, get to be too much fussing, and that becomes something that I would move. I'd use the gate in the next phase of actual first phase signal processing, because I'd be sound sculpting if I was doing anything more than that. So anyway, let's get into what we're looking for. We're trying to cut out any noise reduction. That would be heavy distortion in the upper end or in the lower end. Maybe some clipping distortion noise you might be dealing with if you got a bad file. Heavy bleed from noise around the room or another instrument that might be in the room with you while you're recording. Checking for things like DC offset and cutting that out. Hum, buzz, low-end rumble, trailing harmonics coming off the fundamental to the back end of the sound, upper-end hiss, and also upper-end harmonics and saturations and things that have been included into the sound of whatever instrument you might be able to capture from what might be a VST, or the instrument is one in your room that's it's not that good of an instrument, or your microphone wasn't that good, so you want to have to do a little bit of high-pass filtering on it to cut out some noise, saturations, distortions. And that's for the most part what we're trying to do in this part of cleaning up this file. So now when we're talking about this high and low pass filtering, it's pretty simple. That, like, if I play this sound right here, that you can see there's basically a fundamental, and you see these trailing harmonics coming off the lower end. Sometimes they can be going way down here, there can be rumble going all over the place, and sometimes on some of those things like that, that you might bring a gradual slope in and just start coming into it, trying to clean it up. On that situation, there's not a whole lot going on there, but there is some trailing harmonics off the back. So you might be able to really increase your slope and come right up onto those fundamentals to try to cut off that lower harmonic garbage coming off the back end. But when you're doing this high pass filtering, that it basically, you have to really make a judgment call of where you're cutting, what you're doing is good, or if it's causing detrimental, it's making the sounds sound not bad, because you back off and that sounds really good like that, and you start trying to cut off stuff that's making it sound good. That's not cool. So, and we had talked about duplicating our tracks so that, you know, you've got one track here, you've done it, and you've duplicated that track complete and put an A-B comparison tool on there so you can bounce back and forth and look at it. And that's a huge thing to do in all phases. So you can bounce back and forth and A-B and compare that, back off a little bit more, can I increase the slope a little bit more, or I have to back off on the slope, make a more gradual slope as I come into that sound. And you basically got to fuss with it. Is that sounding good? Is that sounding cool? A-B back and forth between that file you haven't touched and the one you're editing, and, you know, make some judgment calls on that. And it's pretty simple. You basically will, you know, you've got your frequency, what you're dealing with coming in, and your slope coming into it, what degree of slope you're using. And you just kind of, with each different instrument and each different sound, it'll be a little bit different. Normally each instrument has its own range, but some instruments have a huge range, like synthesizers and pianos and things. And you got to kind of really fuss around with it until, you know, you can do some high pass filtering on it that's actually doing good. So you clean up the file as much as possible and clean up any stuff that's in the lower end that you don't want. And the same thing goes with the upper end when you do low pass filtering, except for the problem is you've got a fundamental frequency normally, and then you've got trailing harmonics coming off it, is how it normally works. Now what's happening there is when you start coming in, normally you're going to be using a pretty gradual slope so that you don't cut off harmonic content that you want in that sound. Does that make sense? And, you know, while you're trying to cut out the upper end hiss or any garbage that might be up there, that you also might be trying to tame the upper end harmonics, because there might be saturation and some distortion in the upper end harmonics that are making it sound bad, that you again just want to gradually come into it. And okay, that's doing a little bit. Look, I can probably increase my slope a little bit there. That's okay, I can increase my slope. You know, you'll be looking at the audio also on a spectrogram and your equalizer to help you make a judgment call on that visually and auditorily. So you rely on both of those to, you know, make some judgments on that, and then just start bringing it into it, adjusting your slope. Can I come in there and back off a little bit, wherever, even if you don't think you can hear it. Like, let's say you came into here and you don't, this goes for the low pass filtering or the high pass filtering, and you came in here and it is doing something, but you start A-Bing it back and forth, and, well, you know, it's not sounding that good, so I'm backing off to there, and then you A-B it back. It doesn't sound like it's doing hardly anything. Leave it on there anyway, though, because you're probably still cleaning out some upper end noise, saturations, hiss, and stuff like that you might not be perceiving, but that you're filtering out, that adds up with a bunch of tracks to cause a bunch of noise in your mix and mud. And the same thing with the lower end. Now, once you've gone through that and you messed with that, then you've got notch filtering. Now, notch filtering, we're doing all subtractive EQ work to try to get out anything that's bad that we don't want. So you've got this like piano file, and you're hearing something, I don't know, where is it? So I'll start coming down about this much, and I'll start sweeping around, and it's like, well, I'm not really hearing it, so I'll come down a little deeper, and I'll start sweeping around trying to find it. I go, well, okay, I found it there. That's the problem. So then I start backing off some to see if it's taking it out, but I'm not messing with the other harmonics, making it sound bad. And then I start fussing with the Q. How wide can I make it, trying to get that out of there without affecting the sound? A-Bing it back and forth all the time, trying to hear if I'm actually doing good or I'm making it sound worse. And you might do several of those. You might do one or two, notch filters on that, depending on the sound. And you kind of got to fuss with it. The issue with when you're working with high pass, low pass filters, and notch filters, that it's a really good idea for you to get some sound files and start experimenting with that. What you're able to do when you're trying to clean up audio and clean out any detrimental things that are affecting the sound. First of all, to clean up any stuff that you don't want in there, and the second of all, to clean up stuff that, you know, how should I say this? Let's say rumble's a good example of cleaning out stuff that's not part of the sound. You got low end rumble down here, and so you've brought this high pass filter and you've cut out that low end rumble that's not part of the sound. That's one reason for the filtering that we're doing. The other thing is cleaning out parts of the sound you don't want. Like if you're listening to this and you see this fundamental harmonics and the stuff trailing off it, that you may be trying to clean up some of that also to see, because that's just caused mud in the mix. If it's not part of the sound that makes the sound good, then it's garbage you don't want in the mix, because it just all adds up later on. And so you got to really fuss around with what you can clean out of it that's not needed for the good sound. Anything that's not needed in producing a good sound, you want to cut out as best you can. And that goes the same thing for the upper end. And then you've got subtractive EQ work, doing notch filtering, looking for problem issues, sweeping around. You've got a problem issue here, you might have a problem issue over here. You messing with your Q, how much you can adjust the Q on that, you know, to try to get that out of there, to do, you know, the notch filtering. Now you've got any of the bad stuff cleaned up. You know, and you've A-B'd it back and forth to make sure you're cleaning up bad stuff, and you're good to go. And that takes experimentation. You really need to get out some files and experiment. It'd be different with different instruments, with different sounds in different situations, and it takes experimentation almost every time. So it's something you really need to experiment with. After you get done, you most definitely want to transform to rendered audio, so that you render that onto there, whatever EQ work you did on there, or gate work after you save this file, you know, and then bounce the piece of audio. We talked about the audio. You might have separate events. You might not just have one event. You might have something like this, where you've got this event and this event that you need to rebounce back together, so you're going to have to highlight them and then come out and bounce them so that they're one event again with that file name and all that. So that's a pretty simple concept of dealing with high and low pass filtering and trying to clean it up, and what the purpose of it, and you'll be very happy with it later on if you learn to do a really good job of it. It can really help give you some really pristine audio files to work with, so you can do magic later in the processing phase of your production. So peace, hope, love. I hope you enjoyed this video in our editing series, and I'll see you in the next video when we address phase.